Axios is a foundational component of the modern JavaScript ecosystem. As a primary HTTP tool, it sustains nearly 100 million downloads every single week. That massive user base became an attack vector when Axios maintainer Jason Simon disclosed a supply chain compromise involving the publication of Trojanized code. The attackers pushed two compromised versions directly to the NPM registry, version 1.14.1 and version 0.30.4. Embedded within these updates was a malicious payload. Researchers track this specific injected implant as waveshaper.v2. The sophistication of the incident points directly to North Korean threat actors operating under the designation UNC1069, also known as Ghost Call. Compromising the identity of a single, highly leveraged open-source developer provides an APT with the same access as a direct breach of a hardened corporate firewall. Historically, UNC1069 deployed their playbooks against high-value financial targets, such as cryptocurrency founders and venture capitalists, where the financial payout was immediate and direct. Their pivot toward open-source software maintainers represents a shift toward extreme leverage. Maintainers operate infrastructure that millions of corporations rely on, but they lack the enterprise-grade security teams of a financial institution. Compromising one upstream open-source maintainer yields asymmetric access. A single successful breach allows attackers to deploy malware to millions of downstream endpoints simultaneously. This creates what is known as the human perimeter within open-source package management. The code may be audited, but the deployment mechanism is guarded only by the individual developer. The security of the modern JavaScript ecosystem currently relies almost entirely on the localized individual credential hygiene of volunteer maintainers. The chronological attack path targeting Jason Simon did not begin with a technical exploit. It started entirely without malicious code. The initial contact vector was a message from attackers operating under the guise of a well-known, legitimate company founder. The deception was deep and highly tailored. The attackers cloned the real founder's likeness and recreated exact corporate branding to establish immediate authority. Once initial contact was made, they transitioned the maintainer into a controlled external environment by inviting him to a seemingly legitimate Slack workspace. Inside that workspace, they engineered specific trust-building mechanisms. They set up plausible continuous integration channels and actively shared relevant LinkedIn posts to mimic a functioning engineering team. The attackers relied on these layers of social validation to neutralize human suspicion before attempting a single technical exploit. The pivot from text-based grooming to active payload delivery occurred when the attackers scheduled a Microsoft Teams meeting with Simon. This mock-up represents the critical moment of compromise. Upon joining the call, Simon was presented with a highly realistic, deceptive error modal, warning him that his system was out of date. Triggering that fake update executed a silent background deployment of a remote access Trojan, bypassing his local OS defenses. Once inside the maintainer system, the Trojan had a precise, localized objective. It ignored the source code entirely. This logical flow demonstrates the extraction process. The malicious process navigated the local file system, located the maintainer's static NPM publishing credentials, and extracted them back to the attackers. Possessing these valid localized credentials allowed the attackers to completely bypass the NPM registry's perimeter security. They had native authorization. Multi-factor authentication and registry-level defenses fail completely if a localized, authenticated token is exfiltrated by a Trojan. The final step of the attacker's kill chain was programmatically pushing the waveshaper.v2 Trojan directly to the live NPM registry using those stolen tokens. To understand the ecosystem impact, we have to look at the architectural mechanics of JavaScript dependency resolution. This node graph shows Axios acting as a primary direct dependency for projects that explicitly install it. But code relies on other code. As the graph expands exponentially, it reveals transitive dependencies. These are packages relying on intermediate packages, which ultimately rely on foundational tools like Axios. When an update triggers during a build process, it pulls the newest version automatically. A compromised foundational package instantly cascades outward, infecting the downstream supply chain. Security researcher Ahmad Nasri noted that a compromise of this scale exposes how difficult it is to accurately map true exposure levels in a modern JavaScript environment. Due to transitive propagation, the blast radius of this attack impacts millions of environments and servers that never explicitly chose to install the compromised versions. Upon discovering the breach, Simon immediately initiated remediation protocols to halt the spread. This required emergency triage, complete device resets across his hardware, and the global invalidation of all compromised NPM credentials. Emergency interventions neutralize the immediate threat, but they do not address the architectural dependence on static human credentials that defines the current ecosystem. The required proactive defense is shifting away from long-lived static credentials. This workflow illustrates the difference. The top shows the vulnerability of static keys on local hardware. The bottom demonstrates a cloud identity provider issuing a temporary token directly to a CI pipeline. This is the implementation of Open Identity Connect, or OIDC, within CI/CD platforms like GitHub Actions. It utilizes ephemeral tokens that exist only for the brief seconds required to publish a package. OIDC renders local credential theft via Trojans completely ineffective. If attackers breach a machine, they find nothing because there are no permanent keys to steal. Simon is now combining this with strict GitHub Actions best practices and immutable releases, which cryptographically lock the codebase to prevent post-publish tampering. Securing the JavaScript ecosystem depends on removing static human trust from the deployment pipeline architecture entirely.